Welcome to the Dream Together podcast. My name is Clarence Hill. I am here with John Mark Hart, Scotia Moore, and Lee Rowland. Hey, it is so exciting to take the time to learn from a leader in our history who's made America more beautiful, and he has actually these specific philosophies that we believe that we can apply today. And one of those is simply about how we posture ourselves when we need to address someone else that does not agree with us. We're going to read this first paragraph, and we're going to hear this phrase where Dr. King addresses those who were telling him that he had an unwise and an untimely effort, and he turns around and addresses them as men of genuine goodwill. I want to challenge you right now. Are you ready to have your way of addressing today's issues challenged so that we can walk together and build common ground and a space where all of us can move our societies forward together? Let's get into this conversation. Welcome back, friends. Maybe we'll say the Dream Together family. Dream Together family, welcome back to this conversation around the letter from a Birmingham jail. I'm here with my friends, John Mark, Scotia, and Lee. And it was such a joy to start this conversation last time. I hope you've had the opportunity to spread this podcast, share it with your friends. If you're watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe and promote this conversation. We're working on building a space where we can talk about difficult and challenging things in a way that brings us together and helps the most vulnerable in our societies. There was a yesterday, we're living in today, but we definitely have to be intentional about tomorrow. So these friends are not just friends who like to sit around and think about it. I know when you hear the term dream, you might think, oh, no, I want like action together podcast. But we are action oriented. We're sharing these thoughts because a lot of these conversations have taken place off camera, and we just want to invite you to walk with us. We want to learn from you also. And let's get a space where we can talk about solutions that are going to make a difference. And this conversation is being centered around the letter from a Birmingham jail. Dr. Martin Luther King did it. He made a difference. In the United States of America and even across the world, a lot of the ideas that he promoted have helped us enjoy the peace and the levels of relationship that we are enjoying to this day. And we all know there's more ground to take in this conversation. Sure. So please, if you have never read the letter from a Birmingham jail, this is your opportunity to learn more and to grow with us from the things that Dr. Martin Luther King shared. Let's jump right into this today, right after we just say hello to the crew. Is it crew? Is it team? Is it family? Something like that. I'm going to start on this. No, I'm going to start with you dudes. Let's honor the lady in our group. Scotia, how you doing this morning, afternoon, evening?
I'm good. I'm glad to be here to talk about this transformative piece of work that was done by a man who was isolated and who was persecuted, and out of that breaking flowed this beautiful piece that we're going to talk about today.
Yep. Mr. Cool. There you go. Lee Rowland. And this is true. He is cool. And we know when we're vibing right, when we're vibing with Lee. Lee, as our educator in the group here, when you think of the impact of the letter from a Birmingham jail, what does this do for you to start this conversation?
Puts a little pep in my step to think about the conversation that was this gentleman started with this powerful moment in history as he's in jail. It puts a little pep in my step to think that it really ignited a conversation, dialogue, and action that's still going on today.
Yep, and I love how John Marks gave us the context the last time we talked, because this is actually a response to clergy.
Yeah.
I mean, and these are two groups of people that are called to make a difference, and the clergy that were speaking with or writing to Dr. King, we're actually telling him to slow down. John Mark, what are your thoughts as we enter into this conversation?
I'm excited to dive in. This letter, I don't know how many times I've read it, but it's been a lot of times, and it has shaped my thinking a lot about what does it mean to be a peacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
It has, it's actually changed my life.
Wow.
And ways that I engage. It's a challenging letter. It's not an easy read.
Sure.
Right.
But it challenges me not to be complacent about the suffering of my neighbors.
Wow.
Yep.
And challenges me with practical steps about how to engage. And as it goes, it gets very emotional. I think today we probably won't get to the biggest emotional punch quotes because we're looking at the first part of the letter, but I don't think I've ever read the whole letter without my tear ducts getting involved at some point going through it. So we set the stage last time. So dear listener, if you skipped the first episode, you got to go back and read and listen to it. So you'll get the historical context. But today we get to dive in.
Absolutely. This conversation has me thinking of all of the terms we're using and what people might be thinking when we use these terms. And I can hear one group maybe hearing the term peacemaker, where we're telling you to calm down, don't speak what you're really thinking. Mm-hmm. And actually, authentic unity, in my opinion, is not where everybody just throws away their brains.
That's right.
Doesn't sit around acting like they don't have some real passionate thoughts about things. But what we're saying is we have been with people who have extremely different views. And I'm telling you, there are passionate people who have great points, but they don't have a table to have that dialogue together. Mm-hmm. Here is a beautiful example in the letter from a Birmingham jail. I'm just going to start by reading the first paragraph where Dr. King is living in a season and in a moment where people are actually dying, hurting. Something has to change. The country is groaning. Even the politicians know somehow we're going to have to get past this point. Mm-hmm. But to me, Dr. King had the method. What I love about his method, and you mentioned this on the last podcast, but the quote that Dr. King would say was that unmerited suffering is redemptive. And that quote actually is a thought that comes from the Sermon on the Mount. Mm-hmm. And Dr. King learned a lot of his tactics from Gandhi. And it was so fun. I had a friend of mine from North Carolina share with me that Gandhi, and this was well known, he read the Sermon on the Mount, some people say daily. Mm-hmm. Wow. And the idea, you think turn the other cheek, that sounds weak. No, we just want to talk about how do we translate a feeling of pain or something that's incomplete or disagreement. How do we get to tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're going to dive into in this letter from our Birmingham jail. It reads, "My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticism that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms." Like John Mark shared with us in our last episode, he's writing from solitary confinement. Was it on toilet paper or someone asked me that question.
I think he started scribbling this letter in the margins of the newspaper, and eventually somebody brought him a notepad, if I remember the story correctly. Wikipedia will tell you the correct answer to that.
Beautiful. But no notes, several quotes by philosophers and examples in the past. But this is our opening paragraph. John Mark, just start us off with a little bit more context on what quote stands out to you.
Well, those words, genuine goodwill.
That's great. Great place to start.
He's writing, as you said, from solitary confinement for an act of civil disobedience. trying to draw attention to a situation of tremendous violence and emotional pain and segregation. It's so emotionally fraught that most of us would not have the wherewithal to start this calmly. You know what I mean? In my own life, I could get pretty triggered by much smaller offenses, you know what I mean? And I may go into this thing trying to be reasonable, but then, you start seeing red and things can start to change. But he's writing to clergymen, Christian pastors, Jewish leaders who say, we agree that racism is bad, segregation is bad, violence is bad, but just be patient, just wait, just bring gradual change. And it would be so angry to get triggered. But instead of starting with rebuttal, he starts with, I actually believe that you sincerely think racism is bad. I actually believe that you sincerely think violence is bad. And I want to acknowledge that. I want to honor your dignity as a human being with convictions. But then I want to invite you into a dialogue. Like you said, he's a peacemaker, but he's going to tell the truth. And as this letter goes, he's going to talk about preferring the negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to the positive peace, which is the presence of justice. He's saying your peacemaking is not real peacemaking. But he starts with, you're people of genuine goodwill. And I want to invite you in. I want to honor your dignity. I want to invite dialogue and build bridges. And that's just remarkable to me.
That translates. I mean, it really, really translates. But to me, it's a discipline.
Oh, definitely.
It's a discipline. I'm concerned even a lot about a lot of younger people who, when they have any kind of dissatisfaction with things going on, or they feel like someone's in power and they don't see my viewpoint, to get to that starting place where you say, I believe you're a person of genuine goodwill, and you're actually writing with goodwill in the midst of that pain. I mean, I would even use this in a marriage conference between, spouses when they're upset with each other. I'm like, can you enter an argument where you feel like they're causing you pain? Can you even enter an argument from that level of a point?
Wow.
That's a tremendous level of discipline just to start
acknowledging
a conversation around unity. You know what I'm saying? That's a powerful idea.
It really is.
To me. When we do our conferences, I've learned that we have to extend like a measure of grace. So I call my theory, I'm not trying to start trouble, but I call it critical grace theory.
So I like it.
Okay. So I say grace is critical because when I think about maybe a younger group who would say, hey, I feel like I've experienced racism, and then maybe I may see what they have experienced, and I'm like, not sure I would have classified that as racism, but let's take it out of ethnic things. Maybe they're just someone who feels like they were marginalized or treated wrong in a certain way, and you don't fully agree with that person's pain. The place that I've learned to start is you got to give people room to fully express their thoughts and at least try to give them a level position to communicate. Because I don't think people listen well when they don't think you're listening to them.
Right. Yeah.
Here's the question on setting up being a community that dreams together. When you all look at the context of a lot of the arguments that are going on today around race, where are we missing it to start the conversation, and what should we be learning from this phrase? You're a person of goodwill. Now let me talk to you.
I have so much to say, so I'm going to defer to my sister here.
Nope.
So
Nope. I think you have a lot to say about this, Lee.
Well,
Talk to us, Lee.
Well, I think it's just beautiful. I look and see what people have made a lot of money with, and I'm like, man, I was thinking that a long time ago, and all of us have been there. I wish I had written that, but when Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand and then to be understood, it's really trying to acknowledge another person's point of view, another person's dignity. And so I've tried to practice that as an educator. So I got this little 7 or 8 year old who is acting like a little hooligan and everything. And I tried to first acknowledge it. You're angry. You felt like your teacher did this. You felt like this. And so although they didn't respond the way that I wanted them to, I tried to first acknowledge what's going on with you. Yeah. And so that angry mom that walked into my office that was ready to tear up the place, I first started by trying to acknowledge and honor her. You're upset. Yeah. And I have a story that I like to tell, a mom that wept on my shoulder and got my suit coat all messy and things like that. What turned that situation around is me acknowledging her. Yeah. So the fact that this gentleman did that, I want to honor you, gentlemen, and call out, you have goodwill, you have good intention. Yep. Now let me share my pain. I think it was just beautiful. And I don't know if Stephen Covey, where he got his stuff from, but I just got it through living and looking at people like this. How did they go about their business? There are lessons, deep lessons for us to learn from people that we honor.
There's an intergenerational factor here too, big time. Now, Lee, you're older than I am, and
cooler.
And yeah, well, okay. In the eyes of your children, I'm superhero to mine. So there's an intergenerational factor. So I was having a conversation with a college student just about a couple of days ago, and she was like, "Oh man, but this week has been so hard. I mean, to the point where the expression was really saying, you know, I'm dealing with some anxiety about life." And this is where being able to have a level conversation and pull back the accusations, because I know your cupcakes, you crumble easy. Those accusations are flying. But if you want to build a table, I've just learned you got to posture just a little bit differently.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because they live in a different world. I don't know how a world of social media, what it does to the soul and the pressures that I don't understand that.
In your formative years, especially.
I can't imagine. I mean, right. And so I walked a little bit more gently, but I did throw in my piece, because to me, what brings strength and stability is being connected intergenerationally. So yes. I sold my thought. I said, look, this last 2 days have not been hard. I said hard is when you live in Antakya in Turkey and 90% of the buildings have been destroyed through an earthquake. That's hard. And it's cold. And you don't have food and water. And you have ethnic division between those who are from Turkey and from Syria. That's hard. I don't want to diminish that there's some hard soul things that we face today. But it's like, if we can stretch out generationally, it's bigger than this. Let's put ourselves back in solitary confinement with Dr. King. Yeah. I don't know if he had all of his 4 children at that time. Am I a good dad? Am I about to die before I can raise my children? Right. We know he died at age 38 or 39. You know, have I missed the will of God by putting myself in this pressure? I'm never home with my babies. I know what it's like to walk in, like we've been in 6 or 7 cities in like 4 or 5 weeks with Dream Clock. And I'm saying to my 9-year-old, hey, yeah, we're going to Austin again, right? But in their day, in King's day, he's under all of this pressure to make the next right decision for a whole community, but he's also a dad. And then he can turn around and have that level of pressure on his soul and then say, I think you're of goodwill, even though all of this, the phrase was, Dr. King, what you're doing is unwise and untimely. They're accusing you of something, but to stay level enough, knowing that I'm giving up everything. And as we know, he was assassinated. He gave up his future. Yeah. I'm giving up everything, and you're going to sit inside your comfy office and judge my decision,
Right.
My timing,
my timing
my methods.
to act.
Yeah.
I'm dreaming for my kids.
Yeah.
And to stay level. I just think there's an intergenerational connection. And what we're doing, which I think is so powerful with this letter, there's a connection to say, okay, it's broader than my own world if I can value and appreciate it.
I want to follow up on one thing you said and then throw a question to Scotia. But you were talking about what would it have felt like for Dr. King. He's in solitary confinement and his critics are not. Just put it that way. You know? They have a lot less skin in this game.
Yeah.
But he's saying here, I don't usually answer the criticism that comes across my desk, because if I answered every piece of criticism, I wouldn't have time to do anything but answer criticism. So he's constantly being barraged with criticism. And sometimes that comes in the form of rocks through his window or bombs at his house or things like that. But how do you keep this kind of composure? And when we read this, it's easy to think, well, that's a great man. It ain't me. You know, that's a great man. But I think just to humanize him, just recognizing like to be able to respond in this way was something he had to fight for.
Yeah.
Very early in the movement in Montgomery, there was all sorts of threats coming against his family. We're going to kill your family. We're going to drive you out. And there was a night in particular that he got his kids in bed and made a pot of coffee and sat down to think through, how can I leave Montgomery to preserve my family while doing as little damage to the movement as possible? And while he was sitting down having that thought, he just wasn't getting anywhere. Basically put his head in his hands in prayer. And he said, at that moment, I had an experience that I had never had before. But he said, I sensed the presence of God with me saying, you stand up for justice and I will be with you.
Wow.
You stand up for justice and I will be with you. And his heart changed in that moment. And shortly thereafter, his house was bombed. And he came home, and there was a lot of his supporters there, very probably would have gotten violent. But he went up on the porch and said, hey, everybody go home.
Yeah.
We're okay. We're going to rise above. We're not going to sink to the level of hate. And around this time, he had embraced the philosophy of nonviolence. He got it from the Sermon on the Mount. He got it from Gandhi. He got it from Jesus. But he said, I hadn't fully, he said, I had a gun in my glove box.
Right. Wow.
But that's when I threw away the gun.
Wow.
And he said, this is going to be a commitment. And so later in this letter, when he talks about the steps to nonviolent civil disobedience, one of the steps is spiritual purification.
That's right.
So there's a sense of soul work, psychological work, inner work that needs to happen to prepare us to become the kind of people. Because otherwise I can see the injustice, but I'm going to feel rightly angry, but I'm not going to have the internal strength to be able to act redemptively in this moment.
That's good.
But here's the question that it made me think of. As we're talking about building bridges between people, Scotia, that's something that you do a lot. And with your business you've built bridges between people from different ethnic backgrounds and economic backgrounds, funders, business leaders. How do you do this thing with people that sit down starting with distrust? How do you help them start building bridges?
I start with helping them to find their common ground in terms of what do I activate. But before I can even do that, I have to be vulnerable first. I have to be honest. And that's what I appreciate about this this beginning is he's talking to the brethren and he is laying down, some boundaries. Like, sometimes I don't listen to all this criticism.
Right.
Or I couldn't actually do some constructive work if you live there. But then I think also like there is this identity piece where, I will misquote this this thought, and I will probably misquote the poet who wrote it. I think it's an Iranian poet, but they said the water has never feared the fire. And I feel like he has started off with a sense of like, okay, on an identity level, I'm water. So it's okay. I can receive this criticism without it hitting, undercutting my identity, my wholeness. And so for me, like the beginning of that process of helping others to find their common ground is to be on solid ground myself. Who am I? I'm loved by God. So someone's criticism does not take away from me. Someone's applause does not add to me. I just am. I am loved and I'm okay, like today in this moment. But then to invite others into kind of a process of one, just awakening to the reality of someone else's experience. And then leaving room for lament. Lament is a big deal to me, to actually enter into a space where we allow grief for the acknowledgement of the brokenness. Like we often want to jump from, and I stop the people that I work with from the emotionally handicapping that process of jumping from awareness to solutions. We actually have to stop long enough to grieve with those who grieve and to connect that to some grief that we've experienced in our life. It may not be the same thing, but somehow lament and grief is this bonding agent that I haven't found something else as strong as that, because it moves us into this place of empathy that makes space for love. And so the start of building those bridges is becoming aware. So we're awakened, we give space to lament, and then we can move into hope, which is, what is this new narrative? How can we shift? What are we dreaming into? But we have to acknowledge what has been, what is, before we can start to dream together about what could be in the future. So that bridge building process starts with being whole personally, and then like acknowledging where, and it's a process of like curiosity toward one another. What, okay, you're a mom, I'm a mom. Okay, you're a parent, I'm a parent.
Yes,
okay,
that's
you're
true.
a professional, I'm a professional. What do we as neighbors care about in common? And then building from there.
Yeah, you've done that really, really well. And just to give a little bit more of the story, you brought together practitioners, the people who have rough hands. I say some people like to talk about things, but they have smooth hands. So that's a great idea, but
that would not be mine.
you haven't done much.
Yeah, right.
So thank you for that cute idea. But if the wind blows, it might be 10 miles down the street. But you brought practitioners together, boots on the ground, dirt on the fingernails, people who are in the grind, making sacrifices, paying the price. And you brought them into the same room with a group of people that would possibly fit this narrative a little bit, where they're the ones that are stewarding hundreds of thousands and multiple millions of dollars in the name of charity and care, because there's a divide there also.
Yeah.
And when I think about this piece of seeing someone as someone of genuine goodwill, it takes me back to, I just did a conversation in a city where a group that care for the homeless, several different organizations were together, and a lady came to me, she's like, all this dream clock makes so much sense. But she said, I'm stuck. What should I do? Because they just don't fill in the blank. And I'm like, who are they? Well, the ones who fund us. I said, what are their names?
Right.
And well, they're in Washington, D.C. There's some human being up there with a name. Like now in 80s rap, we heard a little bit of 80s rap. I won't say from who. We got on here. We heard one of our sisters busting some lyrics that y'all can't see on this podcast right now.
Yes, she did.
But in the 80s, in 80s rap, in the Black community, it was the man that was holding us down. And this, to me, is Dr. King talking to the man. But he gives the man the opportunity to be humanized. And to me, you can't have a conversation if you already see someone as a beast. You're supposed to kill a beast to save everybody. If there's a bear in the woods, you need to be looking for a weapon to destroy. And for me, to know there's a bear in the woods, your house has been bombed, people are being hurt every single day. Dr. King, why in the world would you do this? In Scotia, you have removed that veil on the man and you've brought human beings together in spaces with practitioners.
Yeah.
Those who
and
fund.
humanize them by her being vulnerable,
Yes.
but then giving them space to do that. This reminds me of a quote that I'm going to misquote from a great American sage named Scotia Moore. That was about
I know that's right.
about a year ago. We were sitting in a conversation and talking about breaches of trust in our city.
Great language.
But Scotia said the way that we build trust is mostly by how well we steward each other's pain.
Beautiful.
And just that idea of everybody's got pain. It may feel bigger or smaller to us, but once you know a person and you've heard their pain, now how do I steward that with compassion and dignity and love? That when people have done that for me, I start to trust them. I start to see them differently.
So good.
And I think that's part of how we can get to a place where we can talk about hard stuff more constructively.
We could almost do a whole episode on how well do we steward one another's pain. And I would add to that someone else's story.
Right.
Do I even value their story?
I'd like to piggyback to something she said in terms of empathies, what you're just mentioning in terms of stewarding someone else's pain. This part here where he says, where you're calling my actions unwise and untimely, that is the opposite that they demonstrated towards him. And I think Americans, people the world over need to be very, very careful about that. All of us are friends. And I've known times when you're in pain, and I'm trying to make sure that some kind of way I respond to that. When I think about myself as a husband, my finest moments are when I'm empathizing with my wife and she's not responding the way that I think she should be, but I would never call that unwise and untimely. And when I'm in my finest moments, I am looking at her pain and empathizing and saying, okay, my thoughts really don't matter right here. And I can't imagine his pain and his suffering when they accused his action of being unwise and untimely.
Right.
It's the opposite of being humane. It's the opposite of being empathetic. Again, somebody that's been around children a lot. I realize that those children are behaving and responding most of the time out of pain. And when I was able to, and my teachers were able to go and respond to that, it was a game changer. But you never tell somebody that your actions, you're invalidating their actions when you tell them it's unwise, it's untimely.
Even if I disagree with your methods. It's like, we still have to connect on, okay, you acted for some reason.
Yeah.
Maybe we do need to get, did you break a law? Because we'll discuss later in this letter that Dr. King promoted breaking what would be categorized as an unjust law. So that's a whole different conversation we'll need to have in one of our episodes. But just that agreement point of stewarding someone else's pain, have I attempted to try to see from the lens of what they might see? Like for me, look, we were called the N-word on the way to school.
Yes, sir.
We were trained. We grew up in Iowa, had a great community in Iowa, but my friends didn't know that I was half holding my breath every time we drove from one small town to the other. And I only felt safe because I had a bunch of white friends around me.
Yeah.
But I grew up driving through small towns with my family, almost kind of holding my breath because you knew never get pulled over by a small town cop. Now today, most of the chiefs of police are friends. I mean, we have personal cell phone numbers there today. But if I say that, that's not the same. There are others who are Black who may have run into that one. And I haven't run into one police chief or officer who is for this conversation who has said that those ones who actually do hate others don't exist. Well, what if that young person that I'm telling, hey, do it like Clarence Hill does it. Get to the table. take some time. How can he articulate that if he personally ran into that wrong conversation?
Right.
So I've got to be able to weigh both sides.
Yeah.
I think, your experience that you just shared gives you an emotional framework and an emotional touch point that when somebody else shares with you about their pain, even if responding to that is going to inconvenience you, you're going to want to start with compassion and lean in. And I think that this may be a segue to the next quote we're trying to look at here, but part of what they were criticizing him about is, hey, Dr. King, you're not from Birmingham. You live in Atlanta now, and you're this outside agitator coming in, messing up our community where things, we understand what it's like here, and we're comfortable with moving at a slower pace. You're creating all this tension. And obviously there was a lot of people in their city that were not feeling that way.
Yeah.
But often we won't change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change.
Very true.
And so that there's
Very
some people who are not feeling the pain of staying the same.
True.
And so part of the method that they criticize is he's saying, hey, there's already pain in this community. We need to bring that to the surface now.
Yeah.
That's right. Did he call it, there were even blacks that were in the North and other blacks that he felt like should have been supporting him even more in the South. So there's an incarnate calling. There's a calling. There's actually very much a teaching out of the Gospels that if you want to see change in the community, well, get over there. Instead of saying, hey, go change their school system. I know a lot of families who have said our children are going into that same school system, so it can be our shared responsibility to partner with these teachers, to work together with the principals to see something better for our community. Sharing that pain together, to me, helps us see better.
Yeah.
Sharing it together. Lee, you shine in this area. That's why please read The Fantastic Voyage and hear Lee's story. When he was brought in, so you served there for 13 years, right? Yeah, so one of my secrets, I love hearing the stories of these people who make a difference. When you went in there, it was a different story. High suspension rates, and it was true that some of the suspension rates for the black students were higher than the other students, but you saw the whole thing different. By the time it was done, the students had the cell phone numbers of the teachers.
Yeah.
And the teachers shared in their pain. They knew some of the kids had to do their homework in the bathtub. They then began to understand the context of the world these kids had to try to succeed in. And the teacher said, you know something, we're not just going to teach in a comfy setting. We're going to pick kids up in the morning, drop kids off after school. The price to actually build a bridge of hope is actually more than we heard when we went to the university. And to me, you modeled saying, hey, you want to come teach in this school? You're not going to go home frustrated, but you are going to understand that the sacrifice, the shared pain is greater. Any insight into that, Lee? Because I think we're going to wrap this convo up and move on to some more of our quotes here.
Yeah, just what I would like to share is, just giving these teachers the space to take risk and to do things and to share the humanity of the kids, express it, because the kids did not have the ability to articulate that. Some of our parents did not have the ability to do that. And so, I wasn't the Wizard of Oz. I just helped bring out teachers things that were already there. And unfortunately, we're not allowing teachers to express the humanity. We're not giving them room to do what they feel is necessary in the classrooms. And I am a crusader for them because I'm trying to help them across this great city and across this great country of ours to feel that to really fulfill their calling and not feel limited by the systems.
Yeah. There's a way to steward someone else's pain even if you don't endorse
Wow.
maybe how they are currently responding. It's just that the starting place, men, brothers of goodwill. I think you are men of genuine goodwill. That's our challenge for this episode, is to simply ask you that who's the group that you have just like felt like, hey, we're done with you, and it's further bringing division in our country. Because the reason we've got to solve division is because it's the most vulnerable that suffer when the rest of us who do have the capacity to go home. All of us sitting in this circle right here, we will go home and we will have food in our refrigerators. We can figure out how to make enough money to be okay, but there's a bunch of our friends, bunch of our neighbors who don't have that capacity. And when we don't fix division, that's all we want you to take from here. And we want to say this from the start. You're going to hear these phrases that we share along the way. They're going to trigger so many thoughts because you're probably used to only hearing the argument. So you either hear the polarized right or the polarized left.
Yeah.
We want to invite you to walk with us long enough to build a vocabulary for a table in the middle. Because you might find some neighbors who will help make a difference in the areas that you care about.
Yeah.
We're going to say that we believe that you are people, and we're going to give you that place, that you're people of genuine goodwill.
Yeah.
So we invite you to help us build tables like these, invite others to listen to these episodes.
And Clarence, we want them to have literal feet under literal tables with their neighbors as we do. But if you want to come to the metaphorical table, you like, you subscribe,
that's right,
and you share the podcast.
Yeah, you got
That's how you do it.
When you hear these powerful quotes, put those quotes out there.
You tweet Scotia Moore. Steward one another's pain.
And then hashtag dream together. Hashtag dream together. All right, we're out for this episode, you all. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be right back with you.